Picture this. It's 1820 in the rural South. A young white woman is being quietly sent away from her family's home. No farewell, no celebration, just whispers. She's pregnant, but not by the man her family had hoped would marry her. No, the father is black, an enslaved man. And that baby growing inside her? Already marked, already condemned. Before it takes its first breath, the law has already decided who it is and who it is not. Scope News presents a deep dive into the hidden history America was never meant to face, the story of white mothers and the black children they had by enslaved men. We've all heard about the children fathered by white men. Those stories get told. Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings? That name gets taught in schools. Even Joseph Boulogne, the French violinist, was sent to Europe by his white father after being born to an enslaved African woman. But here's a little-known history fact that rarely sees daylight. What happened when the mother was white and the father was black? What happened when the child didn't fit the narrative? There were no trust funds, no quiet relocations. These children were branded, erased, or locked into decades of forced labor. Their mothers, stripped of protection. Their fathers, hunted or forgotten. And the children, treated as if they were never meant to exist in the first place. The records prove it. In 1715, Rose Davis of Maryland stood before a judge and asked for her freedom. Her mother was an Englishwoman. Her father, an enslaved black man. By logic, she should have been free. But the system had no use for logic when it threatened ownership. The court responded with a sentence: serve during life as a slave. Just like that, her lineage disappeared. Her white mother's status erased. The court saw only labor to exploit, value to be claimed. Then there was Eleanor Irish Nell Butler. In 1681, she married an enslaved African man. For that decision, Maryland lawmakers rewrote policy specifically to target her family. They ruled that her children, and her children's children, would remain enslaved for generations. Nearly a century later, her descendants were still trapped. In 1770, William and Mary Butler entered a courtroom to fight for their freedom. They had the records. They knew who they came from. But the court didn't care. They tried again in 1787, and again in 1791. They were not just fighting for liberty. They were fighting for recognition, proof that their mother's whiteness had ever counted for anything. But not every case reached the courtroom. In Virginia, Ann Wall was convicted for having 2 mulatto bastards by a Negro. The children weren't named. The court didn't care who they were, just that they weren't allowed to exist. Ann was punished, and her children were pushed into servitude. In Maryland, a woman named Mary Skinner appeared in the newspaper, not for theft or scandal, but for leaving her white husband and having a child with an enslaved man. Her name was printed in ink, not as a woman, but as a warning. Her child would not inherit protection. It would inherit punishment. The legal foundation for all of this began in 1662. That year, Virginia abandoned centuries of English common law and rewrote the rules. Partus sequitur ventrum. The condition of the child follows the condition of the mother. If the mother was enslaved, so was the child. This made it easier for slaveholders to increase their human stock through the bodies of enslaved women. But it also created a problem when the mother was white. That's where new laws came in. By the end of the 17th century, colonies like Virginia and Maryland had written legislation to fine white women who had children with black men, bind their labor, and force their children into servitude until the age of 30. It didn't matter whether the mother was free, poor, or married. The punishment was generational. Her child became a legal inconvenience. So the law removed the inconvenience by removing the child's rights. And here's where the question deepens. In so many depictions of slavery, films, books, classroom discussions, we rightly focus on the heinous violence done to enslaved women and men. We know about the sexual exploitation, the forced pairings, the systems of breeding. But to learn this particular history, where the white woman is the mother and the enslaved man the father, forces an uncomfortable question. Were these relationships consensual? Were they lovers or victims of a system that didn't care about their feelings, only their punishment? History, when it speaks at all, tends to suggest the latter. These men were enslaved, meaning they had no legal personhood, no right to consent, no real freedom. And while some records hint at affection or mutual regard, the imbalance of power casts a long, dark shadow. Whether punishment was dealt for love or coercion, the result was always the same. Children born into silence, families shattered before they could form, and names erased before they were ever spoken. Generations later, that silence is breaking. DNA tests are uncovering what historical records refuse to admit. Black families are discovering white ancestors, women whose names were buried, whose children were stripped of identity. These stories aren't anomalies. They are part of a pattern. Bloodlines folded into blackness by force, whiteness revoked by state power. None of this happened by accident. These systems were deliberate. From the rewritten laws, to the court rulings, to the newsprint gossip, it was designed to erase the children who disrupted the illusion. A white woman could give birth, but the child would not inherit her protection. Instead, the state would decide that child's future. And that future was never freedom. The people in power knew exactly what they were doing. That's why these histories were deleted. Not because they were shameful, but because they exposed the lie. Because if a white mother's blood could be ignored, then whiteness itself wasn't sacred. It was negotiable. And that terrified the system built to uphold it. The record still exists, so do the descendants. Scope News tells the truth. Here are the facts. Statutes from Virginia, 1662, 1691, 1705, and Maryland, late 1600s, 1700s, enforced long-term servitude and punishment for white women who gave birth to children by black men. Verified historical cases include Rose Davis, 1715, Eleanor Irish Nell Butler, William and Mary Butler v. Richard Borman, 1770, Mary Butler v. Adam Craig, 1787-1791, the criminal prosecution of Anne Wall, and the public case of Mary Skinner in 1769. These cases are sourced directly from state records, colonial court files, and legislative archives. This report is created for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes. It explores historical events and legacies as accurately as possible using available research. But some areas remain debated or underdocumented due to the deliberate erasure of records. Viewer discretion is advised, as the subject matter may be disturbing or sensitive. Scope News strives to present hidden truths of history, while acknowledging that limitations in documentation and imagery may affect how these stories are told.